Asgard's Wrath 2 has completely taken over my life, because it's just that good. I was initially going to call this video a review, but I can't really do that since I haven't beaten the game yet. In fact, I feel like I've barely even scratched the surface of what this enormous game has to offer. So instead, I'm going to make a casual, off-the-cuff video where I just share some scattered thoughts about the game. After playing it for so long, I can't imagine the game magically becoming bad by the end of it, so I think I can safely recommend it and talk about the highs and lows of my experience so far. So just sit back, relax, and pretend that you're listening to a semi-scripted podcast while you're playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, a game where, at the time of this recording, everyone is going to be playing and going crazy over, including myself. So anyway, let's get started. I've been playing fairly consistently since launch day last year, and I just barely unlocked the second character out of the 4 that I need to unlock. So I think I'm about the halfway point with a long road still ahead of me. I can feel it. Not that it's a bad thing, mind you, since every time I load the game up and play for a couple of hours, I'm stunned at how the game continues to surprise me with new stuff all the time. Every time I think the game has exhausted the usefulness of my sword or my axe, there's always some new tutorial that creates a new way for me to use them in interesting ways. Like modifying my sword so that it's also a whip that I can use to swing around like Spider-Man, or use my axe in a similar way to God of War, in the sense that I can throw it and then summon it back to me, which in VR feels amazing. But this game takes it one step further by allowing me to stop the axe in midair and redirect where it's going to fly. Something that will become really important for puzzle solving and even some battles. And speaking of battles, there are certain upgrades that allow you to combine your weapons in order to do these really cool attacks, like slamming your shield down with your whip so you can stun enemies, or slamming both of your weapons together so that your enemies can freeze because of a shockwave that appears. And this is only for the first character you play as, Abraxas, who proved to be a fun character to play with. But as soon as I unlocked the next character, I found myself learning a whole new set of new weapons that are also used very creatively. This new character essentially used animals as weapons, kind of like the weapons that you use in Oddworld Stranger's Wrath, where your bullets were like these little creatures and stuff. There's a fish whose tongue is both a sword and a whip to swing with. There's also a fish that you can use as a turret that shoots enemies. And finally, you have this weird squid thing that can turn into a harp that can shoot energy blasts at enemies, and you have to actually do the harp playing motion to shoot it at things. It's just an insane setup that's unlike anything I had ever seen before. I was worried that these new characters would just be boring repeats of Abraxas, you know, like just a palette swap or just changing your skin, but eventually all the weapons would be the same. But no, other than a couple of tools like maybe the shield and then the swordfish that's basically just the whip again, everything else is new, which of course changes the way that you fight and how you solve new puzzles as well. Initially, I was worried that all of these features would be too much and that I would forget how all of this worked. But the game does a good job at designing its puzzles in a way that you'll always need to use a little bit of everything to move forward so you never forget. Thinking back on the first few puzzles of the game, I'm actually kind of impressed at how things have changed and how complex the puzzles have become without it feeling so. The more I got immersed into this world, the more difficult it was to even feel the difficulty curve happening. The design of every dungeon is built to slowly level you up without even wasting your time with too much dialogue that gives away the answers, you know? There are a few rooms here and there where the characters might give you a hint, but for the most part, you're on your own. And although I've never gotten stuck solving a puzzle in this game, it still feels amazing figuring out the solution. Similar to, say, Zelda games, the dungeons are designed around the tools at your disposal. There's never going to be some out-of-nowhere unfair solution to a puzzle. Everything is well within the bounds of what the game has taught you, which makes it easier to get that aha moment when a game mechanic finally dawns on you and you learn something new. I've always been hesitant when it comes to playing games with a ton of puzzles in them. I always lose confidence and I think that I'm gonna get stuck and give up early on. I just don't have a lot of confidence in my own intelligence, I guess. And that was one of my main concerns when first playing Asgard's Wrath 2. I thought it was going to have a more action-y kind of adventure, and when I found out that it was mainly a balance between puzzles and occasional fights, I was like, maybe this is not the game for me. But fortunately, I have yet to get stuck with any of that, because there's a ton of super well-made levels here that even dumbasses like myself can figure them out without too much trouble. Having a gameplay loop that flows well without too many speed bumps only adds to the immersion, which is done relatively well due to its visuals. The graphics, even on a Quest 2, which is the platform I'm playing this on, doesn't look bad at all, but that, alongside the performance, could be a lot better. For anybody not in the know, the first Asgard's Wrath game was released on PC, which means it was able to have much better graphical power behind it. The sequel that I'm talking about now, however, is only out on the Meta Quest 2 and 3. Even though the Quest 3 has upgraded specs, it's still a portable VR headset at the end of the day, and it's nowhere near close to the power of a full-on PC. As much as I enjoy the game's visuals, and there's still a lot of impressive parts to see, it's still very obvious and clear that the graphics took a big hit in comparison to its predecessor. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, since it seems that the art style has been adjusted slightly so that it gives off more of a cartoony kind of feel to accommodate for these limitations. Even then, you can clearly see some parts that look kinda like an old PlayStation 3 game. I mean, let's be honest. The more you play and the more you see the game stutter when big crazy moments start to happen, it slowly starts to dawn on you why this game takes place in a barren desert with not a lot to render on it. If the setting was different and they had a busier, more bustling environment, I think this open world would have been far more difficult to pull off successfully in having it perform decently as well. When you have this kind of stylized Egyptian setting, they can get away with having a little bit less detail and not have to render as many things. And even then, a lot of the big locations in the game are divided in sections, so you can go to the desert and then go to your hub and then go to this place and that place, and these are all different sections that you can teleport in on one of the menus. It's not like the entire 100% of the game is all one giant map. It is split up into sections, and that's something that doesn't really bother me at all. In fact, I think more regular games should do this in order to improve performance. I know people would complain that it's not all one big giant seamless world, but I personally don't care about that kind of stuff. In fact, I think games like Cyberpunk probably would have worked better on PS4 if they had done this. But anyway, as I was saying, with this stylized Egyptian setting, they can get away with having a little less detail and not have to render as many things. I'm sure there are experts out there like Digital Foundry or whatever that, they can explain this kind of thing better than I can. But what I'm essentially trying to say is that even though the developers had to work around the limitations of the headset, they still managed to pull off a pretty believable and immersive world with really impressive pockets of amazing visuals. Even if the larger picture doesn't look as impressive, a lot of the mind-blowing parts kind of come from these little rooms and dungeons and puzzle rooms that have these like ginormous statues of Egyptian gods or whatever. A lot of the big impressive set pieces are kind of bite-sized, and you're never gonna see like, wow, the entire big desert looking amazing, It's always on the smaller things, and that's sort of where this game shines the most. However, do remember that this is a virtual reality game, and all of this setup, the setting, the music, all of the fights and enemies and everything that the game is proposing, all of this means nothing if the VR experience is not comfortable to play for long stretches of time. You could have a great game, but if you get motion sick or if the controls are really frustrating, then it all comes toppling down. Far more than any regular game where we have standardized game pads and, press X and triangle and do the analog stick, maybe a little bit of motion controls here and there. I mean, it's all standardized, and so we all know how to play a normal game, right? So most developers don't really have to worry about that. But when it comes to VR, that level of comfort can draw the line between playing a game for a super long time or playing it for 5 minutes, getting dizzy, and just never touching that game ever again, right? Fortunately, they kill it in this aspect as well. The controls do feel great and polished, so that every move you make feels supernatural, like pulling out your sword and shield and climbing up platforms, and even running up walls and swinging around. The combat feels so satisfying as well when you take the time to actually engage with all of its mechanics. So you have stuff like parrying, shield bashing, and exploiting weaknesses. And by weaknesses, I mean both physical weak points and elemental weaknesses that you can account for by equipping accessories under your weapons and armor that add certain effects like fire, water, darkness, wind, and a few other things. Equipping these elements also changes the look of your weapons, like equipping a fire relic under your sword, so now you have this awesome looking flaming blade that plays a cool fire sound effect every time you pull it out. So you do the motion and you pull out your sword and you hear "Phew!" Or sometimes you could have a wind relic on your sword. So you pull out your sword and you hear like whoosh, you hear like this whooshing wind kind of sound, which is such a small touch, but it makes you feel so awesome. As I said, it's in the little things where the game truly shines the brightest. Of course, if you don't pay attention to how the combat works, then you're gonna find yourself waving your arms around mindlessly, kinda like how people button mash in a fighting game when they don't know what they're doing. But if you're patient and you actually try to do things right, fighting enemies will be just as satisfying as the puzzle solving. So you have that gameplay loop between exploring the world, puzzle solving, fighting, doing some puzzles, and then fighting some guys here and there. You kind of go back and forth on that. But there's still a lot more of the game that I haven't talked about. To which then, I have been praising the game quite a lot, but it is not without its faults, which are unfortunately about as lengthy as my compliments. But let's go ahead and just talk about them real quick. Not all of it is super bad. I mean, there are some positives in there, but let's just take it one step at a time. If there are any negatives that I can mention with this game is that the story is fairly weak. Up until this point, it's never been something I've cared about at all, and considering the Egyptian theme of the world that you're in, the kind of stories being told are fairly predictable and not that interesting. The story's not super fascinating so far at the point that I'm at, but it's enough to keep you pushing forward, or push me forward, that is. If you've seen any kinds of Egyptian-themed movies or TV shows in your life, then you already know what the storylines for this game are going to be. However, I do like the setup of you playing as a god from one world getting sent to another, in this case being the Egyptian world, kinda like how in God of War you are Kratos, a Greek god that goes to the world of Norse mythology, right? The plot is basically that Loki is an asshole that backstabbed you in the previous game, and then he got all of the Infinity Stones and is out to mess with all of the multiverse. And you may think that I'm joking about the Infinity Stones, but they literally are just different colored stones that give someone power when you collect all of them. I mean, they're literally just Infinity Stones. So now, you have to go and collect essentially the Egyptian version of those Infinity Stones so that you can find Loki and defeat him, while also defeating a whole bunch of other gods on the way there too. That's pretty much all you have to know, and it's all very conveniently recapped at the beginning in case you didn't play the first game. It's a fair assumption to have, since I can't imagine a lot of Quest users having played the first one, which was exclusively on PC. When it comes to the subplots for the main characters you play as, I found it painfully generic. It's the typical, oh, there's a kind-hearted ruler that gets betrayed by the evil advisor, and you have to go kill him and stop his evil regime. It's a tired story that's been done a billion times in a billion other things. Which makes it even more frustrating when I ended up playing as the second character that I unlocked, and then I see the backstory and the objective for that character, and I see there's one big, kind-hearted ruler, but then there's this one guy that betrayed him and killed him, and now he rules with an iron fist, and I'm like, dude, really? Are we seriously doing this again? This was literally the story arc of the previous guy, and now with this new character, we're just doing the same thing again? Big evil guy betrays the ruler, and now he's the ruler, and I have to go kill him. Like, are you kidding me? It's just super done to death, which is why it sticks out as one of the most disappointing parts of the game, which is stuck within a crowd of very good things, right? It just sticks out all the more when you have all of these great high-quality things going on around it. The music is also not the greatest thing in the world. I mean, there are some cool tracks, especially during the fights, and I hate to bring up this reductive argument of, it's Egypt, what do you expect, kind of thing, but I do need to be honest over how painfully generic some of the music can be. I mean, not all of it, obviously. I just said some battle themes are pretty hype, but definitely more than a few tracks sounds like the typical desert or Egyptian themed movie, right? Like, you hear that droning kind of noise, and then you hear that female vocalist that goes like, you know, that kind of thing. There's a lot of slower moments where you just kind of hear that over and over and over and over again. You kind of go crazy hearing that. But yeah, there is some variety on like set pieces and big story moments and battles. It's not all like that, but yeah, a lot of it is like that. But yeah, that's pretty much it when it comes to the music. Going back to the multiverse thing, there are some ideas with that setup that are touched upon a little bit, but almost nothing is done with it, with the exception of that roguelike mode that lets you play randomly generated levels that then contributes to this big online competition between order and chaos that you can take sides in. That's pretty much how they handle that multiverse thing of like, oh, there are many different heroes from many different worlds and you can all band together against Loki. That kind of thing. Oh yeah, by the way, I completely forgot to mention it. On top of the entire open world story campaign, which is already long enough as it is, there's also a roguelike mode that could have easily been its own game, or it could have been sold separately as DLC, but no, it is fully integrated into the game at launch, and it's really fun to play as well. There really isn't much that I can say about it other than it's basically a marathon of randomly generated fights where you use the mechanics from the regular game. You keep going until you die, and then you can reap some rewards out of it if you do it regularly. You can also leave your body behind to either help other players or completely screw them over by attacking them instead. Pretty much every single time that I've died in this roguelike mode, I've died because there's some player that left their body behind and they started challenging me to a fight, and I've never been able to actually beat them, so it is what it is. Speaking of which, after advancing through the game, now that we're talking about people leaving their bodies behind, there is a certain point where you will have access to an item that will allow you to leave an avatar of yourself anywhere in the world. It's kind of like those messages in Souls games, like when you play Dark Souls and you look down at the ground and there's like a message that says, hey, jump down to here, there's something cool, and then you jump and it's just, you die. You know, sometimes it's helpful, you know, here in Asgard's Wrath 2, you can have an avatar that can have emotes and stuff like that, alright? Sometimes they want to have a high five, sometimes they dance, or they just stand still, but sometimes they're useful. There was one time that I was looking for secrets, and there was one of those avatars that was literally just doing an emote that was pointing somewhere, and I looked over at where they were pointing, and oh, there it was, the secret that I was looking for, right? So, depending on how kind people want to be, you know, sometimes it'll be super useful, but the vast majority of the time, it's just kind of annoying. It really distracts from all of the cool stuff that happens in the game. I had it happen more than once where I was having this really cool cutscene with dialogue and everything, and you had these, like, ghostly looking avatars just showing up, you know, doing the floss and twerking in front of a cutscene, and it's like, no, I don't want any Fortnite dances in my cool video game cutscene, okay? So, fortunately, there is an option for you to turn that off, but in the main starting hub, where you decide whether you want to do roguelike or the main campaign, it's kind of like an online hub where, you know, all of these different avatars just kind of show up no matter what. But at least in the regular campaign, you can turn them off and you never have to see them again. And yeah, I ended up having to turn them off. But overall, that roguelike mode is relatively simple. I still can't believe the amount of effort that was put into this part of the game that could very easily be ignored in favor of the campaign. I'm serious, there's literally nothing forcing you to play through that part of the game at all. But it's there if you want to extend your gameplay time by a lot. I'll say it again, this entire mode could have been its own $20 game on the Quest store, with season passes and regular updates. You know, it could have been like a live service thing, and people would have been fine with it, I think. The fact that this comes with the regular game at no additional cost really makes the full $60 purchase more than worth it, especially now where we live in a world where most big games nowadays cost $70. And it's even more of a bargain if you bought a Quest 3 at the time where they were giving this game away for free. For those that bought that headset early on, then they just received one of the best launch games ever for free, which is insane to think about. Anyway, going back to the multiverse topic, there's not a lot that's done with that idea in the regular campaign. The most I've seen so far is all of the otherworldly treasures you can find due to Loki messing around with the multiverse. Like that one time that I found a gun. Literally, I mean just a gun in this Egyptian world where that wouldn't exist. I think it was supposed to be a 6-shooter that belonged to Billy the Kid or something, but I just ended up selling it for money. It would have been cool if you could actually use it, right? Like actually hold it in your hand and maybe shoot the gun one time as a joke, but hey. Other than a few references here and there, like a really wild one where you can find Pinocchio's literal head in a box, which is both kind of fucked up, but also really funny at the same time. And it looks like the Disney Pinocchio, right? It's not like some fake wood little guy. It really just looks like Disney's Pinocchio, his head in a box, like it's the ending of School Days or some shit. But, there really isn't anything too wild going around that aspect. I mean, a lot of it really is just find these secret boxes and you can find stuff from other worlds, right? Like objects that belong to either historical figures or fictional figures. I would have liked it if they went super wild with it, like Loki summoning enemies from like the future or medieval knights that you have to fight or something. Or like imagine somebody like Abraxas, right? The main guy that you play as. Is he's an Egyptian warrior with only a sword and a shield, having to fight against, say, like 1950s gangsters with guns or something, right? I don't know, maybe it doesn't have to go that wild, but I would have appreciated a bit more enemy variety outside of the many, many lizard guys that you fight throughout the game. And of course, there are other enemies. I mean, there's snakes and scorpions and crocodiles, the typical Egyptian-themed monsters and animals that you would fight. But the real threat and the bigger bulk of the enemies will always be these lizard guys. And they are fun to fight, but it does eventually get tiring having to fight these same dudes over and over and over and over again. I mean, when you see footage of this game, you don't know if it's early on in the game or really late into the game, because it just feels like you're fighting the same dudes every time. I swear, it's like a curse with these VR games, right? Like, almost all of them have really low enemy variety, but even then, I mean, they do a good job at diversifying them by giving them stuff like elemental powers and armor and magic, and there's some guys that fly and stuff like that, but sometimes I kind of come out of these fights wanting a little bit more than just a slightly beefier lizard wizard man. But hey, now that we're on that topic, let's talk a little bit about the low points of combat. Because there are a lot of fights in this game, and especially early on where you're trying to learn how to play, things can get super awkward. I mean, they teach you quite thoroughly how to use all of your different abilities, but I found myself panicking most of the time because again, just early on in the game, I'm forgetting how to do certain moves and stuff, so I just start flailing my arms around like I'm playing a Nintendo Wii game until all of the enemies fall over, right? I was getting like Red Steel 1 flashbacks. But there would be times where I was completely in the zone, and every move I was making is deliberate, almost like a choreographed play where everything I wanted to do was working out perfectly. The combat is not perfect, but if you are willing to play by its rules, the highs are super high, especially when it comes to boss battles. And those boss battles really aren't super complicated at all. If anything, I would say that they're so easy to the point that you shouldn't see them as fights. You should probably see them more as just fun set pieces rather than serious challenges. But even then, they do a good job at making you feel awesome by applying a lot of what you've learned without overwhelming you with too much. One thing that kept bothering me the entire time was how the weapons would interact with one another. The weapons you have can collide with each other. If you're in a situation where you're holding the axe on one hand and then the sword on another, you might end up swinging your sword and accidentally getting it stuck on the hook of the axe and not being able to attack. When this happens in the middle of a fight, this can mean life or death, and I have frustratingly suffered the latter more times than I should have. Well, I say frustratingly, but it's actually not that bad, because dying gives really little consequences other than just pulling you back right before the fight that killed you, right? You don't even need a checkpoint for that kind of stuff. You will respawn with full health and armor, but you won't recover the items that you used during the fight. So if you run out of healing potions during a fight, and then you die and come back, those potions are gone. That's pretty much the punishment that you get. It's pretty much the only downside, and other than that, you can keep coming back with pretty much no consequences. Just be sure not to use all of your potions in one battle. In fact, sometimes it's better for you to die now that I think about it, since I've been in situations where I don't have a full armor meter or full health, and as long as I have a checkpoint nearby, I know I can just kill myself on purpose and come back fully charged up, so... Obviously, the most stress I ever felt from dying was from playing the Roguelike Mode, but, there's a small part of me that wishes that there was a little bit more punishment for dying in the regular campaign. I know that I've been accruing a ton of money throughout my adventure. I have so much money, I don't even know what to spend it on most of the time. So, I don't know, maybe do that. Maybe take away some of your money as well after you die. I'm not sure. But anyway, it's really not that big of a deal, but I did just want to point that out. So yeah, the fights can range from either very silly to very awesome, depending on how prepared you are to engage with the game's mechanics. And this isn't even mentioning the synergy that you can have with your companion characters, which is something that I haven't even talked about at all. I almost forgot about those guys. Another thing that I found kind of disappointing, unfortunately, is the companion characters. There's a bunch that you can get, and all of them are useful in their own way. There will be puzzles where you'll need their abilities to solve what's in front of you. They will also fight alongside you, and they have their own skill trees where you can unlock higher stats and special finishers, which is cool. And you can even go to the shop and upgrade their gear and slowly unlock alternative colors for them over time. I mean, there's a lot that you can do with them, surprisingly so. My favorite is the first one that you get. Her name is Subira. She's a leopard lady that can turn into a mount for you to travel the world a lot faster, which, you know, that's just super cool. I mean, all of the other companions have other stuff going on, but I mean, come on, you have a cool giant leopard that you can ride the desert on. I mean, it's just awesome. However, the disappointment comes from more of a story angle, I think. Every introduction to the companion characters is really cool, especially for Subira, the first one you see early on in the game. You know, initially all of these guys are regular animals, but then you as a god can like grab them. You know, you're a giant by comparison, right? So you're grabbing them like they're a little toy, and then you like insert all of this power into them, and that's how they become these like humanoid warriors, which is always, you know, really cool to see. But, you know, after recruiting them and going through all that process, that's pretty much it, unfortunately. They are no longer a character, and they mainly just follow you around. There will be moments where you can do stuff like high-five them or give them a fist bump, which is charming the first few times, but after like the 10 millionth time that you fist bump somebody, it kind of loses its charm, you know? Their specialness kind of fades as well when you can use everyone's abilities on the fly, like they're just tools that you pull out as opposed to people joining you on this quest. It is more convenient to just press one button and immediately just do whatever it is you need to do in a puzzle. I understand why they did it that way, but that convenience does kind of take away from the relevance of the actual flesh and blood characters, you know? They just become another piece of equipment like your sword or your axe that occasionally needs a high five to keep them happy. When you unlock more main characters to play as, the companion characters don't really react to that at all. I bonded with Subira as Abraxas for a long time, but now that I have switched to someone else entirely, somehow those same companions have to be besties with them right out of the gate, right? There's no process on going from strangers to friends. They're already your best friends immediately because you made all of that progress before with the previous guy. But it's weird, I mean, there's just no dialogue to acknowledge this change. You know, you switch out to a different protagonist, and now these companions are just hanging out with you like nothing changed, right? It's just weird. Occasionally, you'll engage in some brief dialogue with your companions, with some choices that you can make, but it generally doesn't amount to anything. Nothing that I've seen. I don't know, maybe it'll all amount to something, but as far as I know, it's just kind of a dead end, honestly. And depending on which companion you have summoned, you can have additional dialogue between the characters in some situations. It doesn't have to be this like relationship thing. For example, there's a dungeon that I was exploring that had a lot of water in it, and Subira, being a feline, hates getting wet. So, as I progressed through the puzzles, the characters would banter with each other and mention how Subira would rather be somewhere else that's more dry, or she found some animal that she wants to eat or something. Other than the puzzles, there's really nothing forcing you to have these companions with you. You could go through all of these temples and dungeons completely by yourself and miss out on all of this dialogue, right? You could fight everybody by yourself, but I do appreciate the effort that is put into making these dialogue pieces, even though they are incredibly easy to miss. I don't want to complain too much because it's clear that the companions already have a ton going on as it is, but I think they could have taken it just one more step further by making perhaps some short story arc for them, maybe a short series of quests for me to follow that's focused on them, instead of just having a cool intro and then basically forgetting about them until there's a new puzzle to solve. I mean, for God's sakes, there's an entire hub area where you can fulfill requests for people, right? So it would have been cool if you could have had some requests to fulfill for your companion characters as well, and then bond with them that way. Man, I think I've talked about everything there is to do in this game. I think? No, actually, actually, no, there is still more. I mean, there's the request that I just mentioned. You can go to your hub, and there'll be a bunch of NPCs that will ask you to pick up a bunch of stuff. There really isn't anything special here. It's basically just milestone sort of stuff, like, hey, go collect 5 flowers, go kill 10 of this enemy, that typical stuff, and then you get rewards. Nothing unusual there. But then there are other activities, like fishing. Yes, there is fishing in this game because you can't have an RPG without fishing. I was never able to catch anything. That is all. That is my detailed report on fishing. I haven't had any success yet, but when I do, I don't know, maybe I'll put some footage on it on screen. If you don't see any footage of me catching a fish, that means that by the time this video came out, I just haven't succeeded in that yet. There's also a mini-game where you can use a slingshot to hit targets. It's actually really fun, even though my arms do get tired holding the slingshot for so long. There's no real story reason for why you would want to do this. I mean, eventually this place just kind of shows up for you to play with, and it is really fun every time. It's like I'm playing Egyptian carnival games or something. And I think that's it. That's about everything Asgard's Wrath 2 has in store for you. And this is only my report after just barely reaching the halfway point. I haven't even beaten the game yet, so there might be even more stuff that I've yet to discover. Newer characters and more difficult puzzles, I'm sure. But, you know, when it comes to the bigger bulk of what you're gonna see, that's pretty much it. I praised and criticized the game a lot in this video, and despite all of that, I honestly can't recommend Asgard's Wrath 2 enough. When I was talking about this game during my Game of the Year video for 2023, the one word that I used to describe this game was finally. Finally, we have a super big, beefy game with loads of high-quality content to engage with that's not just a port of an older game or a short proof of concept. This really does feel like a game, you know, like a legit game that was designed for VR, that fully embraces its platform confidently. You can see that in all of the menus that are designed to be big and easy to touch with a controller, as opposed to a port of a console game where they mainly just keep the regular menus as a regular flat screen game, which might be a little bit more awkward and difficult to work with. But when you have a VR game that's designed for VR, the menus usually look a lot bigger and easier to access, and you can just see that, all of that VR polish in this game. Every time I launch the game, I'm surprised by something new every time, and I look forward to having that continue as I play through the game's second half. If you're someone like me that has been desperately looking for a legit S-tier VR game to sink your teeth into, then yeah, I mean, you should absolutely get this game. It's a no-brainer, and if you bought a Quest 3 recently, then you probably already have this game and you don't even know it. It is 100% worth the time and money. Absolutely, for sure. And at the time of this recording, towards the end of February of 2024, everyone will be going crazy over Final Fantasy VII, but if you want to take a break from that and play something else that is equally as great, in my opinion, Asgard's Wrath 2 is another great choice that is so engaging that the only thing stopping me from playing is the battery life on my Quest 2 headset that keeps running out after playing it for so long. Pretty much the last 5 times that I stopped playing it, it was because of that. The battery just ran out and I couldn't play anymore, so hey, I guess I need to take a break. But yeah, those were my opinions on Asgard's Wrath 2. Thank you for listening to me talk for way too long, and I will see you all next time.